Leoncio Sanchez stood as a towering figure in the bustling heart of the capital, his influence undeniable. Residing in an opulent townhouse nestled within the city center, Leoncio was engulfed by an overwhelming solitude, a truth he staunchly refused to acknowledge, even to himself. His days were a whirlwind of negotiations, relentless business trips, and high-stakes meetings. There was no room in his meticulously scheduled life to pause and reflect. He surged through life with unyielding confidence and resolute determination, much like an arrow slicing through the air towards an unwavering target. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Sanchez was a figure of envy and admiration. He was a regular on television talk shows and a sought-after interviewee. Everyone yearned to uncover the secret behind his monumental success. Leoncio, ever the generous soul when it came to sharing his time management tips and business acumen, still remained an enigma. No one could breach the fortress of his personal life or match the lofty heights achieved by this 45-year-old bachelor millionaire. One particular inconvenience arose upon Leoncio's return from Switzerland. He had barely stepped into his home to freshen up when Teresa, his loyal maid of 8 years, handed him her resignation letter. "Señor Sanchez, I must apologize, but my children are yearning for a quieter life by the sea, and they insist on taking me with them. It breaks my heart to leave this place. Over the years, I've grown fond of you, almost as if you were my own son. But my desire to spoil my grandchildren is strong." Especially with another on the way, Teresa confessed, her voice tinged with sorrow. Leoncio merely frowned, his emotions tightly reined in. Family and other emotional attachments were, in his mind, unnecessary complications, adding chaos to the pristine order of the life he had so meticulously crafted. Indeed, the millionaire often operated with the cold efficiency of a machine rather than the warmth of a human being. Yet, in the ruthless realm of high-stakes business, there was no alternative. One either relentlessly forged ahead, leaving sentiment and hesitation behind, or risked losing everything. Recognizing Teresa's dedicated service, he compensated her generously before summoning his secretary to secure a new maid. His instructions were clear: the candidate must be unmarried and childless. "It would be ideal if you could find me someone inconspicuous, Sylvia," he directed, his tone unwavering. "Someone who stays home in the evenings and isn't particularly attractive to men. Such a person would likely remain with us for a long time." "Understood, Señor Sanchez," Sylvia responded with unwavering professionalism. "I'll find someone suitable." The next day, Leoncio met the new maid for the first time. She was exactly as he had envisioned. Her appearance was demure and understated. She wore a gray, slightly frayed sweater, a black skirt that fell modestly below her knees, and her chestnut hair was neatly tied back in a simple ponytail. Her blue eyes, partially obscured by glasses, conveyed a sense of shyness. On her feet were sturdy, old-fashioned boots. Her voice was soft and hesitant as she nervously adjusted the strap of her bag. Perfect, Sanchez thought with satisfaction. Sylvia has outdone herself once again. It's as if this girl has just stepped out of a bygone era. "What is your name?" the millionaire asked, his voice devoid of warmth. "Blanca," she replied quietly, her eyes avoiding his. "Excellent," Leoncio nodded, a rare hint of approval in his demeanor. Blanca's unremarkable presence was precisely what he sought, ensuring his meticulously structured life remained undisturbed. "Blanca, you will come every morning, even in my absence, and ensure the house is spotless. The bedding must be changed every other day. Make sure to dust the plants and the glasses in the glass cabinets daily. At the end of your cleaning, put on white socks and walk through all the rooms. If the socks remain white, it means you've done your job perfectly and you can go home. If not, please redo the floors." "Is that clear to you?" Leoncio instructed with a tone of finality. Blanca nodded obediently, her voice barely a whisper, as she replied, "Yes, Senor Sanchez." Is she really this quiet? Or is it an act? Leoncio pondered, suspicion clouding his thoughts. She needs to be tested. After Blanca left, Leoncio proceeded to his office. He opened both of his safes, transferring money from one to the other. He pulled out a dozen large bills from one bundle and carelessly tossed them into the now empty safe. He then closed the first safe and left the second one slightly ajar, making sure it was noticeable. Let's see if she's as modest as she appears, he thought smugly, turning on the surveillance camera. The next day, he packed his suitcase and departed on another business trip. When Leoncio returned 2 days later, he was immediately greeted by a pleasant fragrance in the hall. As he walked through the rooms, he noted with satisfaction that everything was impeccably clean, no dust, no crumbs on the floor. Deciding to unwind with a relaxing bath, he headed to the bathroom, which was also spotless. On the counter, he found new shampoo, shaving cream, and toothpaste. He hadn't mentioned anything to Blanca about needing these items, yet she had noticed and restocked them. This small act of thoughtfulness impressed him. After his bath, Leoncio donned his favorite dark blue terry cloth robe and soft slippers before heading to his office. "So far I'm pleased, but let's see what the video shows," Leoncio muttered to himself. Despite his fatigue from the flight, he was in the habit of making prompt decisions. If she didn't take anything from the safe, I will have no more doubts about her. He turned on the TV screen, rewinding the footage to the critical moment. Fast-forwarding through the video, he settled on the couch and began to watch intently. Watching the surveillance footage was not particularly exhilarating. The maid, clad in her black uniform with a white apron, entered the office and commenced her cleaning routine. She methodically organized the scattered papers and folders on the desk, mopped the floor, and meticulously dusted the bookshelves, secretaries, and safes. Leoncio yawned, the monotony of the scene prompting him to fast forward to the next day's recording. The same mundane tasks unfolded, nearly lulling him into a doze. This time, however, the maid walked across the floor in white socks, her face marked with a serious and almost tense expression, which piqued Sanchez's interest. Just as he was about to turn off the video, satisfied that she had not tampered with his money, an unexpected twist occurred. Blanca re-entered the office. Now dressed in her street clothes, a familiar gray sweater, and wide dark blue jeans, she stood in the middle of the office, hesitating. Leoncio leaned in closer, his curiosity intensifying. What was she planning? After a moment of apparent internal struggle, determination settled on Blanca's face. She approached the bookshelves and picked up a book. Leoncio stood from the couch, straining to see better. Was she intending to borrow something from his personal library? She really is a bookworm, Leoncio mused with a smirk. But his amusement turned to utter shock when he saw that Blanca was not holding a book, but his old photo album. Leoncio's mind raced. Why would she be interested in his photographs? His disbelief grew as he watched her hurriedly flip through the pages, stop at one, and extract a photograph. She then cast a furtive glance around and quickly slipped the photo into her pocket. The revelation left Leoncio astounded and deeply intrigued. Leoncio Sanchez was engulfed in a fiery rage. The thought that this girl could be a journalist, a paparazzi who had deceitfully wormed her way into his sanctuary, was almost too much to bear. It all clicked into place. Her modest, unassuming demeanor had been a masterful act. Furious, he shut off the video and rushed to the bookshelf, his hands trembling as he grabbed the photo album. He furiously flipped through its pages, his eyes scanning each one. Every photo was in its place except one. Overwhelmed by a mix of anger and betrayal, Leoncio collapsed onto the couch, letting the album fall from his hands and land with a heavy thud on the floor. He stared ahead, lost in a daze, his mind blank yet his heart aching with a resurgence of old, nearly forgotten bitterness and disappointment. For what seemed like an eternity, he sat there, paralyzed by his emotions. The loud, rhythmic ticking of the clock eventually broke through his strange trance. Shaking off the lingering haze, Leoncio stood up, brushing aside the strands of damp hair that had fallen across his face. With a calm resolve, he left the office. Tomorrow, he would direct Sylvia to arrange a meeting with the new maid in his office. But for now, he recognized that he needed rest to regain his composure. The next day would bring a challenging conversation that required his full mental acuity. The following morning, Leoncio Sanchez woke up 10 minutes before his alarm, a habit ingrained in him through years of rigorous discipline. He rose from his bed, took a long, hot shower, and brewed a strong cup of coffee. As he sipped his coffee, he allowed the warmth to settle his nerves. After finishing, he dressed meticulously in his usual impeccable style and headed to his office. Sylvia, as always, greeted him in the reception area. She was dressed in a striking red suit, and her tall, slender frame and blonde hair made her look every bit the professional she prided herself on being, the very face of the company. "Good morning, Mr. Sanchez," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "How was your trip?" "Excellent." As always, Leoncio replied briskly, not in the mood for small talk. "Sylvia, I need you to do something for me." "Of course, sir. What do you need?" "Oh, the new maid. Have her come to my office. I need to have a word with her." "When would you like her to come in?" "The sooner the better," he replied, his tone leaving no room for delay. "Understood, Mr. Sanchez. I'll call her right away." Leoncio nodded curtly and retreated into his office, the door closing behind him with a definitive click. An hour later, a timid knock echoed through the room, signaling Blanca's arrival. She stood at the door, her posture reflecting her nervousness and apprehension. Blanca stepped in hesitantly, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes lowered. The atmosphere in the office was thick with tension as Leoncio scrutinized her every move, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Good morning," Blanca. Leoncio began, his voice cold and measured. "Please have a seat. We need to discuss something important." Blanca nervously complied, sitting down on the edge of the chair, her hands still trembling slightly. Leoncio's piercing gaze never left her, analyzing every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. The stakes of this conversation weighed heavily in the air, promising a difficult and revealing encounter. "Come in," he called out. Leoncio Sanchez frowned and crossed his arms over his chest as the girl awkwardly entered and sat across from him. So Leoncio began sharply, "Confess, which newspaper do you work for?" Blanca's eyebrows shot up in astonishment, and she looked at the millionaire with confusion. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she stammered. "Oh, but I believe you understand perfectly well," Sanchez replied in an uncompromising tone. "I saw everything. There was a camera in the office." Blanca paled and lowered her gaze, her body stiffening with fear. Silence hung heavily in the office. "You mean the photograph I took from the album?" she whispered finally. "Exactly," Leoncio said, his voice dripping with anger and irritation. How skillfully she pretends to be an innocent lamb, he thought to himself. Blanca looked up at him with her blue eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. "Yes, I took it, but I swear I don't work for a newspaper, and I didn't intend to publish it." Her tone was so sincere that it struck Leoncio. Either she's a phenomenal actress, or she's telling the truth, he mused fleetingly. "Then why did you take the photograph?" And why? He paused, gathering his composure before finishing that one. Blanca's chin trembled as she fought back tears. "Mr. Sanchez, I took that picture because it shows you with my mother." Her words hit Leoncio like a thunderclap. He felt his breath catch and his mind reel. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The photograph I took from your album has my mother in it," Blanca repeated quietly. "Your mother?" he asked, still in disbelief. "Lord, how is this possible?" Blanca nodded, her eyes meeting his with a mix of pain and resolve. "It's not a coincidence," she said disdainfully. "I knew exactly what kind of man I was getting involved with when I took this job." Leoncio was stunned, struggling to process the revelation. "But how could this be? How did you know?" he asked, his voice trembling. Blanca's eyes were filled with a mix of sorrow and anger. "My mother told me about you. She showed me the photograph years ago. She said you were a man of power and influence, but she also warned me about your cold, unfeeling nature. When I saw the job opening, I knew I had to come here to see for myself." Leoncio felt a wave of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. "Your mother," he repeated, his voice softening. "Who is she?" "Her name is Maria," Blanca replied, her voice breaking. "She loved you once, but you left her without a word. She never recovered from the heartbreak. I came here to understand why you did what you did and to find closure for her and myself." Leoncio sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. Memories he had long buried resurfaced, and he was forced to confront the pain he had caused. For the first time in years, he felt a pang of guilt and regret. Blanca watched him, her expression a mix of hope and fear. "Mr. Sanchez, I need to know, why did you leave her?" Leoncio's heart ached as he struggled to find the words. I was young and foolish. I thought I needed to prioritize my career over everything else. I never realized how much I hurt her." Tears streamed down Blanca's cheeks as she listened. "She deserved better," she said softly. "She deserved someone who would cherish her, not abandon her." Leoncio nodded, his own eyes filling with tears. "You're right. She did deserve better. I was a coward, and I've lived with that regret every day." Blanca stood up, her resolve firm. "Then honor her memory by becoming a better man. Don't let your past mistakes define you. Learn from them, and maybe one day you'll find redemption." Leoncio watched her leave the office, her words echoing in his mind. He knew she was right. It was time to change, to make amends for the pain he had caused. And as he sat alone in his office, he vowed to become the man Maria had always believed he could be. Leoncio Sanchez was utterly taken aback. He had suspected that Blanca's quiet and modest demeanor might be an act, but he never imagined she would confront him so boldly and with such biting accusations. "How dare you," he thundered, trying to regain his composure. "You stole something that belongs to me, and now you have the audacity to make such accusations. How dare you?" Blanca met his furious gaze with an icy calm. "I took one thing from you, but you stole everything from my mother," she retorted, her voice unexpectedly fierce. Leoncio's heart clenched with pain. "Did she say me steal?" "She betrayed me herself," he started to say, but Blanca's eyes narrowed, and she lifted her chin proudly. "What are you talking about? My mother would never do such a thing." But Leoncio Sanchez no longer heard her words. Memories of days long past, which he had spent years trying to suppress, suddenly burst forth with a vengeance. He closed his eyes, and involuntarily he was transported back 22 years. Back then, Leoncio had just graduated from university and was desperately searching for his first job. Coming from an ordinary family with no influential connections, he knew he had to rely solely on himself. He walked into company offices, personally handing his resume to the secretaries of the bosses. Maria was the assistant to the director of a promising logistics firm. The first time Leoncio looked into her blue eyes, it felt as though he had been struck by lightning. The slim red-haired girl captivated him instantly. Despite knowing it was bold, he felt he couldn't let the chance slip away. Blushing and stuttering, he dared to ask her to lunch. Maria had smiled, a soft, genuine smile that melted his nerves. "Sure, why not?" she had replied, and they met for lunch the very next day. Those initial lunches turned into dinners, walks in the park, and long, late-night conversations. Leoncio felt alive in a way he had never experienced before. Maria was not just a romantic interest, she was his confidante, his support, the one who believed in him when he barely believed in himself. But as Leoncio climbed the corporate ladder, his ambitions grew. He became consumed by the need to succeed, to prove himself in the cutthroat world of business. He started working longer hours, taking on more responsibilities, and slowly, without realizing it, he began to drift away from Maria. She tried to understand, to be patient, but the distance grew. One day, in the midst of a heated argument, Leoncio had accused Maria of holding him back. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with so much love, were filled with tears. "I'm trying to support you," she had said softly, but he had been too blinded by his ambition to listen. In a moment of frustration, he had walked out, leaving her standing alone, her heart breaking. Now, sitting in his office, those memories flooded back, and Leoncio was forced to confront the pain he had caused. He opened his eyes and looked at Blanca, seeing in her the echoes of the woman he had once loved and lost. Blanca's expression softened slightly, seeing the turmoil in his eyes. "My mother always told me you were a driven man, but she never stopped loving you," she said quietly. "I took the photograph because it's the only connection I have to a past I never knew. She deserved better than to be forgotten." Leoncio felt a tear slip down his cheek. "I was a fool," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought I needed to sacrifice everything for success, but in doing so, I lost the most precious thing I had." Blanca nodded, her own eyes misting over. "It's not too late to make things right," she said. "You can still honor her memory by acknowledging your past and trying to be a better man." Leoncio stood up, his resolve hardening. "You're right," he said. "I can't change what happened, but I can make amends for my mistakes. Thank you, Blanca, for reminding me of what truly matters." Blanca offered a small, hopeful smile. "Thank you for listening, Mr. Sanchez." As she turned to leave, Leoncio called out, "Blanca, wait." She paused and looked back at him. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as a maid, but as a bridge to the past I need to reconcile with. Let's work together to honor your mother's memory." Blanca nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. "I would like that," she said softly. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Leoncio Sanchez began the long journey of redemption, determined to become the man Maria had believed he could be. Lord, with a slightly superior air, glanced at Leoncio's threadbare suit but agreed nonetheless. They met the following day, and Leoncio took Lord to an upscale restaurant, one far beyond his financial comfort zone. However, he believed she deserved nothing but the best, so he spent his last pennies on fine wine and exquisite dishes. Lord was visibly impressed, as it seemed she, like Leoncio, had never experienced such luxury. They later laughed heartily, reminiscing about the pompous, wealthy diners at the nearby tables. Their first date was quickly followed by a second, a third, and then a fourth. Leoncio and Lord reveled in each other's company, discovering an uncanny ability to communicate with just a half word. Conversations flowed effortlessly, and their connection deepened with each meeting. Leoncio soon realized he couldn't envision a future without her. With growing affection, he decided it was time for her to meet his parents. Nervous, he prepared for the introduction, but his anxiety proved unfounded. The family dinner was a resounding success, the atmosphere warm and inviting. His parents looked at Lord with admiration, filling Leoncio with pride and joy. That evening, under the starlit sky, he confessed his love to her for the first time. They stood on the veranda, enveloped by the warm evening air and the shimmering stars above. Leoncio felt an unparalleled happiness as they held hands tightly. Leaning towards her ear, he whispered, "I want you to be my wife." Lord laughed softly, whispering back, "But you haven't met my family yet." What if you change your mind? Leoncio shook his head firmly. Nothing could change my mind. They shared a long, tender kiss under the stars until his parents called them back inside to taste his mother's famous chocolate cake. The following weekend, Lord invited Leoncio to her home, marking the next step in their blossoming relationship. "Now it's my turn to introduce you to my parents," Lord declared with a radiant smile. Leoncio felt a surge of nerves, even more intense than the first time he had introduced her to his own family. He spent an inordinate amount of time selecting a shirt, carefully ironing it, but it still seemed wrinkled to him. Finally, after much fussing, he got ready and left his house. Lord's parents lived just a few blocks away, so he decided to walk. Along the way, he stopped to buy flowers and chocolates for Lord, her mother, and her younger sister. He tried to recall her sister's name but drew a blank. In their conversations, Lord always referred to her as Dragonfly. As he approached the house, her name finally surfaced in his memory: Federica. Lord had mentioned once that her sister was named after their grandfather. Leoncio knocked on the door, which swung open to reveal a red-haired girl who looked about 14. "Hi, Federica," Leoncio greeted cheerfully. "I'm Leoncio, your sister's friend." He expected a welcoming smile, but Federica only furrowed her brow and muttered something incomprehensible before disappearing into the house. Shrugging off the awkward encounter, Leoncio stepped into the spacious corridor. Lord's family was clearly well off. They lived in a large mansion with ample room for everyone. A few moments later, Lord descended the grand staircase. She wore a stunning red dress with a deep neckline, complemented by a beautiful pearl necklace. Her hair was elegantly pinned up at the back, adorned with a shimmering hairpin. Leoncio's breath caught at the sight of her. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Thank you," she replied, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Come, let me introduce you to everyone." Lord looked at him with confusion. Then her eyes clouded over for a moment, as if she was trying to remember something. "Wait, before that happened, I lost my phone. I was sure it was on my nightstand, but it wasn't there. The next day, I found it under my pillow. It was very strange. I never put it there. But I was so glad to find it that I didn't think much of it. I thought I'd see a bunch of missed calls and messages from you. But the phone was empty. So I called myself only to hear that my number was blocked. I sat on the bed feeling out of sorts when my sister walked into the room. She asked me how I was doing, and I complained that I couldn't reach you on the phone. He probably found someone else." Federica shrugged indifferently and left the room with those words. Lord helplessly shrugged her shoulders and cast her gaze down. "And you believed her?" Leoncio guessed. "Federica never liked me from the start. She probably didn't want us to get married. I wouldn't be surprised if I found out she took your phone and wrote those messages." Lord flared up, but couldn't retort. "She's always been a rebel, and yes, she was against the wedding. She was jealous of me being with you," she confessed, and suddenly burst into tears. "What's wrong with you?" Leoncio trembled. He wanted to hold Lord close and never let go. "Federica ran away from home when she turned 18. We don't know where she is, if she's alive. Our parents nearly went mad with worry. It undermined their health." "I'm sorry, Lord," Leoncio whispered. He hesitantly stood up and approached. Then he sat down on the couch next to her and gently hugged her, fearing she might push him away. But Lord, on the contrary, leaned into him and cried even harder. They sat embraced until she calmed down. "So Blanca is my daughter?" Leoncio dared to ask. Lord just nodded in response. "I'm sorry it all turned out this way," Sanchez said bitterly. "I'm sorry I didn't see her being born and growing up." He lowered his head, feeling the pain of emptiness and loss. Lord gently ran her hand through his hair. "But you're here now. Yes, you can't change the past, but you have the present now. and Blanca has found you. She needs you more than ever." The millionaire lifted his head decisively. "And I'll be there." Then he looked at Lord with tenderness. "And you, do you need me?" Lord smiled and nodded in response. "Yes, I do. I never could forget you, Leoncio Sanchez." Hearing this, the man felt like the luckiest person on earth. He held tight to the only woman he ever loved and, for the first time in 22 years, allowed himself to dream of a beautiful future. And now he was sure his dreams were destined to come true. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much. Walking home that night, hand in hand with Lord, Leoncio felt a profound sense of joy and anticipation for the future. The evening had been a resounding success, and he was one step closer to making Lord a permanent part of his life. "Oh, I see Dragonfly has let you in already," Lord exclaimed joyfully upon seeing Leoncio. "Yes," and then promptly vanished, he admitted with a laugh. "That's her style," Lord laughed. She took the flowers and chocolates from him. "Let's go to the living room. Our parents are already waiting for us there." Leoncio took a deep breath and followed her. Lord's parents turned out to be very pleasant and excellent conversationalists. They asked Leoncio about his work, and he willingly shared the latest news, revealing that he had recently secured a job at a reputable investment firm. "We're so happy for you," Leoncio, Lord's mother, said warmly. "Our daughter mentioned that you were looking for quite some time and that her company had unfortunately rejected your application." "Yes, that's true, but I'm not upset about it. Lord's company has given me a treasure far more valuable than any job position," Leoncio replied, smiling tenderly at Lord. She returned his smile, her eyes glowing with affection. Federica, however, grimaced at the sight. She hastily stuffed everything on her plate into her mouth and, without thanking anyone, retreated to her room. "Federica clearly doesn't like me," Leoncio whispered to Lord. She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't pay attention to her, darling. She's always like that." Leoncio wanted to believe her, but something nagged at him, suggesting that Lord might be wrong. Despite Federica's provocative behavior, the evening was a great success. The conversation flowed smoothly, and Leoncio felt welcomed by Lord's parents. When the evening came to an end, and Leoncio kissed Lord goodbye, he felt a wave of happiness and relief. The anxiety of the past few days had melted away, and he was confident that the most challenging moments were behind him. Now, he could focus on proposing to Lord and planning their future together. With his new job, Leoncio envisioned a life where they could afford a larger apartment, a place where they both would feel cozy and comfortable. These optimistic thoughts accompanied him as he walked home, took a relaxing shower, and peacefully drifted off to sleep. Everything was aligning perfectly, just as he had planned. The next morning, Leoncio woke up feeling refreshed and determined. He began his day with a sense of purpose, ready to take the next steps toward building a life with Lord. His heart was light, and his mind was filled with visions of their future. He knew that, with her by his side, he could face any challenge that came their way. As he prepared for work, he couldn't help but smile, knowing that he was on the brink of a new and exciting chapter in his life. Even better, an old university friend who had become a real estate agent found him a stunning apartment in the city center overlooking a beautiful park. Leoncio decided to view it alone, wanting to surprise Lord. As he walked through the bright, spacious rooms, he imagined Lord's reaction and felt certain he couldn't have found anything better. The apartment seemed tailor-made for the two of them. Without hesitation, Leoncio made the deposit. He then went downtown to buy an engagement ring for Lord. He deliberated over various options until he chose a delicate and elegant ring adorned with a pale blue topaz, the exact color of her eyes. He purchased the ring on credit, planning to pay it off with his next paycheck. Now I just need to propose to Lord, Leoncio thought, meticulously planning every detail. He wanted the moment to be beautiful and romantic. While strolling through the city center, he noticed a small, cozy restaurant where a violinist was playing. He stepped inside and ordered a cup of coffee. As he sipped his drink, he listened to the music and allowed his dreams to transport him far away. He envisioned a future walking hand in hand with Lord, seeing her as his sole destiny. He imagined them having children, then grandchildren, and eventually spending their old age in a quaint house by a lake, somewhere outside the city. The vision was so vivid that it brought a tear to his eye. Determined, he got up, paid for his coffee, and resolved to return to this restaurant with Lord to propose to her amid the beautiful sounds of the violin. The proposal took place the following week, and everything unfolded perfectly. Lord suspected nothing. She looked more beautiful than ever, her pink dress accentuating her fragility and tenderness. She had curled her hair, letting it cascade in beautiful waves down her shoulders and back. Leoncio felt as though everyone around was only looking at Lord, and he swelled with pride knowing she would soon be his wife. He felt like the luckiest and happiest person on earth, with a beautiful woman by his side and his work going better than ever. It was like living in a fairy tale. When the violinist played one of the most poignant and tender melodies, Leoncio got down on one knee and proposed. Lord couldn't hold back her tears, and everyone around applauded. "Will you marry me?" Leoncio asked, his eyes shining with anticipation and happiness. "Yes," Lord replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will." They embraced as the room erupted in cheers, sealing their commitment with a kiss. The night was filled with joy, laughter, and dreams of the future. Leoncio felt his heart soar as he held Lord close, knowing that this was just the beginning of their beautiful journey together. The promise of shared dreams and a lifetime of love stretched out before them, and in that moment, everything felt perfect. The guests applauded the beautiful couple once again. Leoncio lifted Lord up and twirled her around to the enchanting sounds of the violin. When they finally sat down at their table, a gray-haired man with a long mustache approached them. He wore an old-fashioned checkered jacket and trousers with pleats. "You're a very beautiful couple, and I'm a retired photographer," he said softly. "It might sound strange, but it happens. I got so tired of photographing endless and monotonous weddings that 5 years ago, I swore I wouldn't take another photo. But you've inspired me. There's so much love emanating from you. So please, allow me to take just one photo." Lord smiled and nodded. Leoncio sat close to her, hugging his beloved, and the man took their picture. A couple of days later, he sent a copy of the photo to Sanchez's office. Leoncio carefully tucked it into his planner, eager to show Lord later. The wedding was scheduled for the end of April, leaving just over a month to prepare. However, life intervened in the lovers' perfect plans. One morning, Leoncio arrived at work to find a note from his boss asking him to come to his office. Surprised and somewhat nervous, Sanchez immediately made his way to the chief's office. On the way, he pondered why the boss needed to see him. He really hoped he wouldn't be fired for some unknown reason. After all, the wedding was just around the corner, and the move to a new apartment was imminent. Losing his job now would be unthinkable. However, Leoncio's fears were unfounded. He immediately noticed that the boss was in a good mood. He greeted him warmly with a friendly smile. "I have news for you," Sanchez the boss said, "and I hope you'll be as pleased with it as I am." Leoncio smiled, albeit a bit cautiously. "I certainly hope so too." The boss gestured to the chair opposite him, and Leoncio sat down. "The thing is," the boss continued, "we're opening our first overseas branch." "Oh, congratulations," Leoncio said sincerely. "I wonder what I have to do with this," he thought to himself. "And you have a direct role to play in this," the boss said, as if reading his thoughts. Miss Sanchez was surprised. Yes, you, the boss affirmed. You've proven yourself to be an invaluable asset to this company, and we believe you're the right person to lead this new venture. It's a significant opportunity, and we're confident you can handle it. Leoncio's heart raced. The offer was incredibly flattering, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Thank you, sir. This is a tremendous honor, he said, choosing his words carefully. But may I ask where the new branch will be located? In Zurich, the boss replied. We need someone there to get things started as soon as possible. Leoncio's mind whirled. Moving to Zurich meant leaving behind everything he and Lord had planned. When would you need me to start, he asked, trying to sound composed. Within the next 2 weeks, the boss replied. We want you to oversee the setup and ensure everything runs smoothly from the outset. Leoncio felt torn. This was a career-defining opportunity, but it clashed with his personal life in the worst possible way. I need to discuss this with my fiancée, he said finally. We're in the midst of planning our wedding, and this would be a significant change for both of us. Of course, take the evening to talk it over with her, the boss said understandingly. But we do need a decision soon. Leoncio nodded, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. As he left the office, he couldn't shake the mixture of excitement and dread that filled him. How would Lord react? Would she be willing to uproot their plans for the sake of his career? The questions plagued him as he made his way home, his mind racing with possibilities. That evening, he sat down with Lord and explained everything. She listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to contemplation. Zurich is a beautiful city, she said finally, and this is an incredible opportunity for you. But what about our wedding? Our plans? Everything we've been working towards, Leoncio asked, his voice filled with concern. Lord took his hand and squeezed it gently. We'll figure it out. We always do. Let's take this one step at a time. If this is important for your career, we'll find a way to make it work. Relief washed over Leoncio. He leaned in and kissed her, grateful for her support and understanding. I don't know what I'd do without you, he whispered. Good thing you'll never have to find out, she replied with a smile. The next day, Leoncio informed his boss of their decision. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations, not just for the wedding but also for their impending move to Zurich. It was a challenging time, but with Lord by his side, Leoncio felt ready to face whatever the future held. Together, they were unstoppable, and he knew that no matter where life took them, their love would always be the foundation of their strength. You excelled at university. Your diploma speaks for itself. You have excellent reviews from your professors. You've also proven yourself to be a young but very promising specialist here. We need people like you. That's why I've decided to appoint you as the manager of the branch that is about to open in. He didn't manage to finish his sentence because the agitated Leoncio interrupted him. I'm very flattered, sir, but does this mean I'll have to relocate? The boss raised an eyebrow. Is that a problem for you? Leoncio hesitated for a few minutes before responding. The thing is, sir, I'm getting married soon. How soon? The boss asked, scrutinizing the young man. In a month. The boss cleared his throat and adjusted the already perfectly arranged papers on the table. I'm sorry, Leoncio, but this is a very important step for the company. I didn't just choose you randomly. I believe you have a great future ahead. If you lead our branch, you'll be on a path that many aspire to, but not everyone gets such a chance. Consider yourself very lucky. Leoncio nervously adjusted his tie, as if it were choking him. But what about the wedding? Invitations have already been sent out. Then postpone it for a short while. You'll go settle in, then come back, have your wedding, and take your wife with you. It's simple. Leoncio still had doubts. Tell me what's bothering you. The boss began to lose patience. Leoncio looked him in the eye. I'm very worried that Lord. What about Lord? Can't she wait? The boss smirked sarcastically. Sanchez nodded awkwardly. The boss stood up and began to pace nervously around the room. What kind of love is it if the girl can't wait a couple of months? And why do you need such a wife? Leoncio understood that the boss's words were more than fair, but something inside him clenched at the thought of postponing the wedding and leaving Lord here. Or do you want to be handpicked? The boss continued to protest. Your fate is at stake right now, not just yours but your entire future family's. Doesn't she want to live decently and for your children not to need anything? Remember my words, you'll be a millionaire in no time. Do you want to miss such an opportunity? The boss's arguments sounded more than convincing, and Leoncio reluctantly agreed. Back in his office, he could barely wait for the end of the workday. In the evening, he and Lord agreed to have dinner together. He bought a bouquet of crimson roses and hurried to the restaurant, which was a few blocks away from the office. He arrived first. Lord had written that she would be a little late. Leoncio sat at the table and rehearsed the speech he was going to say to his beloved for the 100th time. He had never been so nervous before, and his heart ached and didn't want to go anywhere. Finally, Lord appeared. She was wearing a striking dark blue dress with an open neckline. A silver bracelet sparkled beautifully on her wrist. She had swept her hair to one side and wore long silver earrings. All the men turned to look at her as she walked to the table where Leoncio was waiting for her. How can I leave her alone and go? He thought jealously as he rose. Sorry, dear, got stuck in traffic, Lord chirped, hugging him. He handed her a bouquet. So beautiful. Thank you, darling, the girl smiled. Leoncio helped her sit, then sat himself and cleared his throat. He knew he was about to ruin Lord's mood, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. I need to tell you something, he said with a voice unfamiliar to him, trembling with nerves. Lord instantly sensed his state, and the smile faded from her face. What happened? The girl asked, concerned. Leoncio recounted the details of his conversation with his boss, carefully observing his beloved's reaction. Lord paled but quickly composed herself. Of course, I'm upset that we'll have to postpone the wedding, but career prospects are very important for you, for us, and our future, Lord said. Your boss is right. Leoncio couldn't believe his ears. He knew Lord was sensible and rational, but he didn't expect her to accept this news so quickly and without much emotion. What if she doesn't love me at all, he briefly thought, but he quickly pushed away his doubts. Thank you, my love, he said. I'm so glad you understand the importance of what's happening. Did you think I would make a scene over a couple of months' delay? Lord laughed. Leoncio laughed too, feeling surprisingly relieved. Yes, that's exactly what I thought, and I also don't have the money to pay for all the dishes you broke in this restaurant. The rest of the evening went perfectly, and the next day, Leoncio began to prepare for his trip. Their meetings with Lord became even more tender. Both felt that the separation was approaching with each passing hour. On the day before his departure, Lord came to Leoncio. They sat on the couch and turned on some movie, but both were too distracted to follow the plot. Leoncio breathed in the scent of Lord's perfume, wanting to memorize every detail. The girl held on to her beloved tightly. Around midnight, Leoncio said he would call a taxi, but Lord shook her head. Tonight, I want to stay with you. Leoncio's heart jumped in his chest. Are you sure? I thought you wanted to wait until the wedding. Lord nodded decisively. Yes, I'm sure. Tonight, I want to be with you. Early in the morning, Lord left. Leoncio asked her not to see him off at the airport. He knew saying goodbye there would be even harder. He didn't want to leave her crying among a crowd of strangers. As they said goodbye at the doorstep, both couldn't hold back their tears. "I'll write as soon as I land," Leoncio whispered. Lord nodded. "I'll be waiting," she said. "I love you." "I love you too, and I already miss you." When Leoncio closed the door, he suddenly felt very scared. For a moment he thought they might never see each other again. He wanted to rush out of the apartment and chase after the girl, but he restrained himself. That would look more than foolish. They had already decided everything. He didn't know that Lord was also standing behind the door, pressing her hands to her chest, hesitating to knock. The new country greeted Leoncio more than warmly. Everyone treated him with respect, which amazed the young man. He himself felt very young and inexperienced. At first, it was difficult for him to adapt to the new life, but gradually the young man began to get used to it, and it became easier for him to fulfill his obligations. Every day he called and wrote messages to Lord. Time flew by quickly, and the lovers eagerly awaited their meeting. Leoncio had already bought the ticket. They only had to wait 2 more weeks. That evening, Leoncio called Lord as usual, but her phone was switched off. Strange, he thought. That had never happened before. The young man called back an hour later, but the result was the same. He called Lord all evening, but she remained unreachable. The next day, a message came: "Forgive me, Leoncio. I met another man and fell in love with him." The young man almost dropped the phone. His hands trembled so much. He quickly dialed Lord's number again, but she didn't pick up. "Don't call me anymore," she wrote a minute later. Leoncio barely restrained himself from smashing the phone against the wall. How could she? After all the words she said to him, and he like a fool was waiting for their meeting, and she just betrayed him. Leoncio threw himself on the bed and, unable to hold back, burst into tears. By evening he had a fever. He called the office and said he wouldn't be able to come to work tomorrow. He slept through the entire next day. The fever subsided, but Leoncio couldn't get up and make himself do anything. He just wanted to forget. Fortunately, the next day was Saturday, and he didn't have to go to the office. Leoncio spent the whole day lying in bed again. He hardly ate anything. On Sunday, he got into the car provided by the company and drove out of town. He wandered through the surrounding fields for a long time, trying not to think about anything, but he couldn't erase Lord's image from his memory. The girl stood before his mental eyes as if alive. However much Leoncio tried, he couldn't help but feel love for her. "I must let her go," he said aloud. "She chose someone else." Returning home, Sanchez returned the ticket, took a bath, and shaved, determined to start a new life without Lord. He blocked her number to stop checking incoming calls and messages every minute. On Monday, the young man went to work, and the familiar life once again swept him into the whirlpool of events. Leoncio tried not to remember the past and not to think about the future. All he had left was the present, and he was ready to act and make the most of everything it could offer him. He succeeded in everything he undertook, and with each success he reached higher peaks. Eventually, Leoncio Sanchez left the company that had opened up so many opportunities for him, returned to his homeland, and started his own business. Luck favored him in everything. His business brought in more and more money, and one day, Leoncio became one of the most successful and wealthy people in the country. "So what do you think my mother did?" Sanchez heard the question, which seemed to carry an Arctic chill. He blinked, pushing away the memories, and focused on Blanca's face. She looked at him hostilely. "She found someone else 2 weeks before the wedding." "Isn't that enough?" he said angrily. The blank expression on her face ignited as she looked at the millionaire in astonishment. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, bewildered. Leoncio stood up from the table and turned away to the window. Long-forgotten feelings of resentment, powerlessness, and despair surged back into him with renewed force. "So she kept this from me," the man bitterly uttered. Blanca remained silent. casting her eyes down. She no longer felt hatred towards the millionaire. Something about the man's posture and the tone of his voice made her reconsider her opinion of him. "I don't know anything about it, but I'm sure it's a mistake," she whispered. "After all, my mother was already pregnant with me 2 weeks before your wedding." Leoncio felt like he misheard. He turned to the girl, staring at her incredulously. "What? But that can't be." Blanca bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. "My mother told me that you spent the night together before your departure. That's how I came into existence," she said softly. Leoncio nervously ran his hand through his hair and sat down. Then he closed his eyes, pain contorting his features. "Is it true?" he asked without lifting his gaze. "Just don't lie to me, please. I know what people are capable of for money." He looked at Blanca. She was as pale as a sheet. "I know you don't believe me," she murmured, "but I want to get to the bottom of this myself. I always dreamed of seeing my father, of feeling what it's like to be a beloved daughter. I've always been deprived of that. My mother said my father died, but one day I found her diary and learned everything." Leoncio looked at Blanca, unsure whether to believe her or not, but his heart squeezed in response to her words. He no longer saw her as a brazen hypocrite. No, there was something in her eyes that made her seem fragile and vulnerable. He wanted to embrace her like his own daughter, to stroke her hair for a long time, soothing her worries and instilling confidence in her for tomorrow. "I think only one person can give us the right answer. It's Lord," the man finally said decisively. "But she doesn't know I'm here," the girl said, frightened. "I got a job with you without her knowledge. She doesn't think highly of you. I've heard her say many times that you're a coward and a scoundrel when she saw you on TV." Leoncio flared up. "So that's what Lord thinks of me," he bitterly thought to himself. Then he stood up decisively and, circling the table, extended his hand to Blanca. "Let's go, señorita. We need to resolve this as quickly as possible. Your mother will have to give us an answer." They left the office, descended in the elevator, and got into an expensive car driven by an elderly chauffeur. "Where to, Mr. Sanchez?" he asked. Leoncio nodded at Blanca. The girl gave the address, and the car set off. On the way, Leoncio and Blanca remained silent. Finally, the car stopped in front of a rather affluent house. The man and the girl got out of the car. "Is Lord home?" Leoncio asked anxiously. "Yes, she's working remotely," Blanca replied. Leoncio hesitated. Perhaps it's worth warning her not to catch her off guard. But Blanca shook her head. "No, let's just do it now, so she has no way to retreat." Sanchez nervously swallowed. Blanca took out a key from her purse and opened the door. They entered the bright hallway. "Mom, it's me," Blanca called out. "Is everything okay?" Leoncio heard a painfully familiar voice coming from somewhere very close. He suppressed the urge to rush into the adjacent room and embrace Lord. "Yes, but I'm not alone. I have a guest with me, and he wants to see you," Blanca declared. "Who is it?" the woman replied, and Leoncio heard the sound of a chair being pushed back. In a moment, Lord appeared at the threshold. She was wearing an elegant dark green dress and a white cardigan. Her hair was shorter than in her youth, but still the same shade of red. It cascaded in voluminous waves over her shoulders. Lord's gaze remained unchanged. Leoncio once again saw the same blue mischievous eyes of the young woman he still couldn't forget. However, when Lord realized who stood before her, shock flickered in her eyes. She anxiously covered her mouth with her hand. "Hello, Lord," Leoncio murmured softly. His hands trembled. His heart pounded desperately in his chest. "What are you doing here?" Lord asked harshly. Finally, regaining her composure, she crossed her arms and looked at the man with hostility and coldness. I came to find out the truth, Leoncio admitted. What truth are you interested in? Lord retorted. At that moment, Blanca intervened in the conversation. Mom, are we just going to stand in the doorway? Let's go into the room. Lord shifted her gaze to Blanca, and her facial expression softened slightly. She silently turned and headed into the living room, with Leoncio following her and Blanca bringing up the rear. As everyone sat down, there was a palpable tension in the room. Sensing it, Blanca decided she was unnecessary here. As soon as the girl left, Leoncio couldn't hold back and spoke as if all those years hadn't passed. Why are you angry with me? It was you, not me, who didn't answer my calls and then wrote that you met someone else and fell in love. Lord raised her eyebrows in astonishment. What? I never wrote that, she exclaimed. I was pregnant and waiting for you to tell you about it in person, not over the phone, and you just disappeared and blocked my number. Are you saying I made it all up? Leoncio replied in the same tone. Lord looked at him with confusion. Then her eyes clouded over for a moment, as if she was trying to remember something. Wait, before that happened, I lost my phone. I was sure it was on my nightstand, but it wasn't there. The next day, I found it under my pillow. It was very strange. I never put it there. But I was so glad to find it that I didn't think much of it. I thought I'd see a bunch of missed calls and messages from you. But the phone was empty. So I called myself only to hear that my number was blocked. I sat on the bed feeling out of sorts when my sister walked into the room. She asked me how I was doing, and I complained that I couldn't reach you on the phone. He probably found someone else. Federica shrugged indifferently and left the room with those words. Lord helplessly shrugged her shoulders and cast her gaze down. And you believed her? Leoncio guessed. Federica never liked me from the start. She probably didn't want us to get married. I wouldn't be surprised if I found out she took your phone and wrote those messages. Lord flared up but couldn't retort. She's always been a rebel, and yes, she was against the wedding. She was jealous of me being with you, she confessed and suddenly burst into tears. What's wrong with you? Leoncio trembled. He wanted to hold Lord close and never let go. Federica ran away from home when she turned 18. We don't know where she is, if she's alive. Our parents nearly went mad with worry. It undermined their health. I'm sorry, Lord, Leoncio whispered. He hesitantly stood up and approached. Then he sat down on the couch next to her and gently hugged her, fearing she might push him away. But Lord, on the contrary, leaned into him and cried even harder. They sat embraced until she calmed down. So Blanca is my daughter? Leoncio dared to ask. Lord just nodded in response. I'm sorry it all turned out this way, Sanchez said bitterly. I'm sorry I didn't see her being born and growing up. He lowered his head, feeling the pain of emptiness and loss. Lord gently ran her hand through his hair. But you're here now. Yes, you can't change the past, but you have the present now. And Blanca has found you. She needs you more than ever. The millionaire lifted his head decisively. And I'll be there. Then he looked at Lord with tenderness. And you, do you need me? Lord smiled and nodded in response. Yes, I do. I never could forget you, Leoncio Sanchez. Hearing this, the man felt like the luckiest person on earth. He held tight to the only woman he ever loved, and for the first time in 22 years, allowed himself to dream of a beautiful future. And now he was sure his dreams were destined to come true. As the millionaire decided to test the new maid by leaving the safe open and turning on the camera, we witnessed a revealing moment that provided us with valuable insights. What have you learned from this intriguing story? We want to hear from you. Take a moment to reflect on one thing you have learned from this video and how you plan to bring it into practice in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us create more compelling content and share more fascinating stories with you. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next video.